Here's two guys that survived a major shootout on the game Halo, Aaron and Jonathan.
Howdy, and welcome to episode 31 of In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. In today's episode, Tony Kidd turns us into straight shooters. We're your hosts, Aaron
and Jonathan.
You are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Before we begin, a brief announcement. In the Rabbit Hole is now accepting applications for show sponsors. For more information, please use the contact form on the site and choose option Advertise. Now on with the show. We're joined today by Tony and Maripat Kidd, owners of Kidd Innovation Design. They are the only people we think and do rightly have the website address coolguyguns.com. What's so cool about them? When your obsession with 1022s reaches its pinnacle and becomes a true sickness, the kids will show you what true 1022 profession looks like. Thanks for coming on the show today, Tony and Mary.
Thanks. Thank you for having us.
When did y'all first decide to start Kidd Innovation Design?
We started probably with the 1022s about 99, I think, maybe 2000. I had been pistolsmith for 10, 15 years, somewhere in there, and kind of came up with this trigger, the two-stage trigger that we do was kind of the beginning of it all, and that's kind of when we kind of broke into that and started the whole trigger thing, and then it's just escalated and grown from there over the years.
And I think when we spoke before, you said that you told me a little bit about your history. How did you get interested in gunsmithing? As
a kid, I liked anything that shot a projectile or went fast. And if it didn't do those things, I really wasn't interested in it. And I always really liked guns and hunting. Did a lot of hunting when I was a kid, a young man. And I had done, some of this, some of that, and had my run with college and kind of came to the conclusion that I needed to do what I wanted to do, and I figured out how to make money at it later. But when I decided to be a gunsmith when I was probably 25, 24 maybe, and went to machinist school, and then from there went to, Colorado School of Trades, gunsmith school. And I've been a professional gunsmith ever since. I worked for some individual retail shop type things, and started working for the Army in 94, I believe it was. No, actually, I was in 91, and at Fort Hood, and ended up with Army Marksmanship Unit at Fort Benning in 94, I think. And
so what did you do for the Army? 'Cause you were a pistolsmith for the Army, correct?
Yeah, for the Army, the Army Marksmanship Unit is the Army shooting team, and they're based in Columbus, Georgia, at Fort Benning. And we had probably about 20 some odd gunsmiths, machinists, and 80 to 100 shooters. And the AMU has a pistol team, which I was the chief pistolsmith, and that supports the action team, which is IPSC, Bianchi, 3-gun, and then you have service pistol and international pistol. And then we also had international rifle, international pistol, international shotgun, which is trap and skeet, service rifle, and also the international rifle, running bore, small bore, prone, all that, air rifle. So it's a pretty big shooting complex, and I was hired to run that pistol section, and where we supported all the, anything to the handgun, we built and modified. We either purchased guns, it may be we supported the international But we either, built guns like 1911s. We built all the match guns, and international stuff was pretty much, that's all European. It's pretty high quality stuff. So we either, modified it or might redesign a part or a part of the gun, but just try to give the shooter the best, advantage equipment-wise that we could.
Tony, how do you go from precision pistol smithing to the 1022, which, I love the 1022. It's one of my favorite guns to have, but I've also had a stock Ruger 1022, and it's not exactly what I'd call a precision high tolerance firearm out of the box.
Yeah, well, pistol, a semi-auto rifle. I think I spoke to you once before, and we talked about where a semi-automatic rifle is much more, it's closely related to a pistol. It is a pistol, it just has a stock on it.
Right.
And, it's a lot more complicated. Auto loaders are a lot more complicated than bolt guns or revolvers, single shot, stuff like that, because so many things are happening at one time, and the trigger assemblies, the geometry of them on an auto loading rifle is, basically the same as what you have on a pistol.
Mm-hmm.
So my background in pistols was, pretty extensive, and looking at the 1022, a friend of Charles Gartland, Sergeant Gartland, had built a 1022 that was just a very, very accurate little rifle, and had noticed it shot really well, but the trigger was really awful, and it just wasn't anything you could do to it to modify it to really make it, what I thought it needed to be. So I thought it needed to be a two-stage trigger and redesigned it, and of course that's that's kind of my background. A lot of pistol shooters are very, very picky trigger. Nobody's as finicky about a trigger as a pistol shooter.
Right.
Yeah, that was something when you and I were talking about a little bit about it. That was one of the things that you told me that I was surprised about, or not necessarily surprised. I'd never thought about of how picky pistol shooters are about their triggers versus rifle shooters.
Yeah, you have, a pistol shooter. Actually, they need to be. They have so much more working against them because they have no support for the pistol. There's no sling, there's no shooting jacket. They're not shooting prone. You're standing there, you're holding the gun in your hand, and especially a bullseye shooter, service pistol, or an international shooter who has to shoot with only one hand. And a service pistol guy that's shooting 4-pound trigger with one hand has a lot of disadvantages to a rifle shooter because you have the thing that gets you with trigger control and the braking of the trigger is the muscle movement in your hand. So you're holding the pistol with your hand. You've got to have, especially on an auto loader like a 1911, if you're shooting ball ammo, you're shooting a pretty good load, and you have to hold the gun firmly, or it won't cycle. You'll get failure to eject, it won't feed. You'll have all kinds of stovepiping problems. So you have to hold the gun like a man, and then you got to be able to pull that 4-pound trigger and break that 4-pound trigger without the muscle movement in your hand changing. And that's really tough, whereas a rifle shooter has a lot more support. You've got the buttstock buried in your shoulder. You've got your foot. You've probably got a sling. You work on your position so that you're pretty much, a bench rest. You're a vault, and you're part of that rifle. And when you break the trigger, it doesn't have the effect on the rifle that breaking the trigger on a pistol has on the pistol. Trying not to let that front sight quiver or move from the muscle movement of your finger, snapping that trigger. So they're very picky, very focused on how the trigger breaks. But there again, that's the great experience for building a good trigger and knowing what a really good trigger feels like.
So Tony, that's I've got a great question for you that I know a lot of our listeners you've said two-stage trigger a whole bunch of times, and I'm going to also preface this with I have the two-stage trigger for my 1022. Actually, I've got two of them now, both my 1022s. Could you explain to us what the difference is between the two-stage trigger and a single-stage trigger?
Yeah. A single-stage trigger, which is your most common trigger, all your triggers on whether it's a bolt gun, a rifle, your standard auto-loading pistols, anything, shotguns, they're all single-stage triggers, which means you pull the trigger and the gun fires. The hammer drops and it fires. And in order to do that, pretty much all factory guns, any gun that's assembled and mass-produced, has to have excess engagement and to make it work. Because every time the gun cycles, the hammer is cocked, blown to the rear. The sear is disconnect the sear so the sear can come back, catch the hammer. Well, that hammer and sear connect on a very small surface, and for that to work, you actually have to have excess weight and excess engagement. So usually what you have is creep. You pull the trigger and you feel the sear sliding off of the hammer, and usually 99 times out of 100 it's not consistent, and that gives you a very inconsistent trigger pull. When you pull the trigger, it'll just kind of bump along and let go, and even if it feels like if you don't notice that creep, that extra, and it just jumps off, it's going to it's going to change. It's going to vary. If you get a really good scale and to weigh the trigger, it will, 4 pounds. Let's just use the number 4 pounds. You're probably going to get anywhere from 3 3/4 to 4 1/4 pounds on that trigger because of that excessive engagement. A two-stage trigger is somewhat the same. I mean, it still operates the same, except that the geometry has changed so that when the hammer is cocked, it's sitting very lightly. And you want the geometry to be set up so when the hammer comes back and it's in the cocked position, it's almost at a balance point. It's like it could go back forward, or if you tipped it a little further, it would want to rotate around backwards underneath the gun, and go around the other way. So that not a lot of pressure on that hammer. And the contact between the sear on a two-stage trigger, you have a lot more engagement on the sear. So when the hammer cycles, when the gun cycles and the hammer's cocked, the sear comes back and engages the hammer with a lot of engagement, which normally would be a bad thing. But that makes it very reliable. It always resets. It doesn't miss. It doesn't jump off. It doesn't double. It doesn't go full auto. You don't have the problems that you can come up with a single stage trigger when you try to cut that engagement down to a bare minimum. So you have a bigger engagement, but the geometry lets that creep. Basically, the first stage is just creep, but it's extremely smooth and it's extremely repeatable. So that if you pull the trigger to the rear and you remove that creep out of the sear, that excess engagement between the sear and the hammer, it's very smooth. And then if you let go of the trigger, it will just slide right back into place. Not stick there like a single stage would creep out, and as it got farther, if you quit pulling the trigger, then it just hangs up there.
Yeah, my novice point of view on all that is really just for the listeners and everything. I found that with your triggers and the two-stage triggers, when I pull through, it's a very consistent feel, and I get that break, and then I know exactly where my shot is going to go off. With the single-stage triggers, it kind of feels crunchy through the trigger pull. Especially with the Ruger 1022 and the out-of-the-box trigger. There's almost a grittiness to the pull. And then at the very end, you've got that hard break that happens, and it's just not a smooth transition through the whole pull.
Yeah, what you can do, a two-stage trigger has a few advantages. One is reliability. Another is consistency. That you have an extremely consistent trigger pull because you'll take that first stage up, whether it's 3 ounces or 3 pounds. It doesn't matter. It's always going to be the same, and you're going to, as you pull the trigger back, you're going to hit the second stage, which basically the second stage is just another a plunger or a camming point that stops the rearward movement of the sear and the trigger to the point where you probably got 1/1000th of an inch engagement left between the sear and the hammer, where there's absolutely no movement left without breaking the shot and letting the hammer go. So you've taken it to the very, very finest edge that you can before the hammer goes. So it's very consistent. That second stage pull, you'll pull up that 3 pounds, whatever the first stage is. You hit your stop, which is your second stage, and then at that point you have that set up for your next second stage wake. You build that pressure, and the shot will fire. And if you don't feel any movement, there's nothing. It goes, and it's consistent. You have very little muscle movement in your hand to disturb the shot. And it also gives you the big advantage if let's say you have to have a 2-pound trigger in a competition, then you can divide, with a 2-stage trigger, you can divide that weight up to 50-50. Normally you're going to go 50-50, 60-40 between first stage and second stage, but you could go 75-25 and put 1.5 pounds on the first stage and 0.5 pound on the second stage for a total of 2 pounds. So that when you pull that trigger, it's almost like using a compound bow, that kind of advantage over a recurve bow. You pull the trigger back, you're going to be drawing up that 1.5 pounds, and then you're going to bump that stop. And at that point, when you feel that stop, you know that all it takes is another 0.5 pound of pressure to break that shot. And it feels as though you're shooting a 0.5 pound trigger by doing that, because your first 1.5 pounds is preloaded.
Right.
So it gives you a huge advantage in competition where you're required to have a 2 pound, a 4 pound, whatever the trigger weight is, instead of having to just build pressure till you get to that 2 pounds, and then it breaks all at once, that 2 pounds, and you have the muscle movement, and it's a lot harder to actually get that trigger control, that knowledge and expertise in your trigger finger to break it.
And I got to say, it's a beautiful thing. It's a really beautiful thing of engineering, the 2-stage trigger, especially the ones that you produce. And I know a lot of our listeners have taken shooting classes, and one of the first things we all hear is the biggest impediment to aim is trigger control. So being able to get that whole consistent shot down and being able to get that accurate shot and those center shots that everybody wants, it's all about trigger control. And when you've got that 2-stage trigger, I felt, at least personally, it gives me that added trigger control I'm looking for. And it actually, to some extent, it feels like a really well-tuned 1911 when I'm shooting that 10-22.
That's right.
Yeah.
Jonathan and I are both very active in Project Appleseed. I don't know if y'all are familiar with Project Appleseed or not.
Yeah, we're somewhat familiar with it.
One of the things they stress very strongly is dry firing. And there's a lot of myths around dry firing, and it's, I think, perpetuated a lot in gun stores and such. Help us understand, what is it that when people are worried about dry firing their gun, I understand that this has a bit of it used to be more true than it is. And I know with the 10-22, my understanding is that that's not true with the 10-22 and a lot of modern firearms. But what is it that people are worried about whether they know it or not, when they're talking about dry firing ruining a gun?
Yeah, dry firing used to be, before we were born, cartridges, before they had primers, center fire cartridges with primers in the center, everything was rimmed, was a rimmed cartridge, and like a rimfire, like 22 long rifles are. So back in the day, back when guns were a lot cruder than they are, firing pins actually protruded. You had a hammer that hit the firing pin, and the firing pin would come out, protrude out, and could actually hit the breech face of the barrel. And if there wasn't a cartridge there, it was supposed to hit the rim of the cartridge, but if there wasn't a cartridge there, it would hit the breech face of the barrel and put a ding in it. And that would be steel on steel. You wouldn't have the cushioned blow of crushing the rim of the cartridge. And so you could break your firing pin because, metallurgy wasn't that good. And you would also damage the chamber right there at the breech face. You'd put a ding and it would start to make a little dimple that would poke out into the chamber so that your cartridge wouldn't go in. You'd have that little dished out spot. And then you could file that away because now you've got this little ding in there that's poking into your chamber. Well, you file that away to get your cartridge in, and now over time you don't have a solid backing anymore behind the rim of your cartridge because you've dished out, you've deemed all that the steel behind it, out of the breech space. So then when you would hit the rim of the cartridge, it sometimes would cause a misfire because it would give a little more, wouldn't crush as good. Rimfires are still the same way. They still, basically the cartridge is the same design. But you don't have that problem because all modern firearms are designed so that the firing pin protrudes, and generally you're going to want about 35 thousandths of protrusion coming out of the breech face of the bolt, and whereas your headspace is going to be 42, at a factory gun you're probably going to be 50 thousandths. So that's going to stop you, 15 thousandths short of hitting the breech face. So even if there's not a cartridge there, you have some kind of pin or you have something inside the bolt that interrupts that forward movement and only lets it go, far enough to hit the rim of the cartridge and crush the rim, but not go far enough to hit the breech face of the barrel. So in modern days, like now, it doesn't hurt at all. I mean, you could in some, an isolated case, break a firing pin or something because of dry firing, but that's just going to be bad luck. It's not going to be because you shouldn't have been dry firing. It's just it's an old theory, and something that's been passed down through the generations that you shouldn't dry fire your gun. And I can tell you right now that any competitive shooter that shoots serious competition dry fires a lot. They dry fire probably a whole lot more than they shoot live rounds. So it's not going to hurt a well-designed firearm.
Yeah, I think one of the tactical instructors that Jonathan and I both trained with for a bit of time often told us he wanted us dry firing 90% of the time. Or what was it? He wanted us...
It was 100 dry fires for every shot you take.
Yeah, you can learn so much more from dry firing than you can from actually shooting, because you can, as you dry fire, you watch. If you're shooting like a pistol, dry firing is very important because your sight alignment is so critical, and you have to get used to dropping that hammer, doing your dry fire without disturbing the sight, so you can, at that you can completely focus on the sights, making sure they're perfectly aligned. And when the hammer drops, they stay perfectly aligned. If the pistol fires, you don't really know if you had that follow through and you had maintain that perfect sight alignment, because that's what's so critical on a pistol. Rifle also, but extremely with a pistol, and very difficult to do, to break that shot without disturbing the sights. And that just lets you learn to do that by dry firing. If you don't dry fire, you really, a lot of times you're never going to really know where your mistake is. So it's actually a big benefit.
So, Tony, we kind of covered trigger control and sight alignment now a little bit, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about the 1022 again and the precision capabilities of, the 22 long rifle is around. And I know you've got the standard receiver and then the super grade receiver, and how that's the extra. I guess that's all based on the extra connection point. So, what is I think a lot of people think of the 22 as an inherently inaccurate round. Now, I've seen some pretty impressive things done with a 22, even out of the rifle that I built up using parts you were nice enough to sell me. But what do you think of those discussions as far as what is the actual accuracy capability of the round?
Yeah, 22 rimfire is very accurate. It's you have like any gun, any rifle, any pistol, you have all the the components. Everything plays a factor in the accuracy of the gun. With a 1022 and a rimfire, the rimfire, they can be extremely accurate. You try to make them as rigid as you can. Try to make everything as consistent as you can. And one thing you learn from, again, back to my pistol background, and with auto-loading pistols and building those to be extremely accurate, you find that the consistency in the gun, and is like it kind of affects the harmonics of it. And you try to find where you tune the gun almost like the harmonics of it so that it vibrates the same. Everything cycles the same, and the consistency is when you start building an accurate pistol. So the components have to fit closely, and that all factors right into 1022, which is basically a pistol with a long barrel and a great big pistol grip on it. And the rimfire 22 is very accurate. The one thing you struggle with, and where people might think that it's not accurate, is the ammunition. And with center fire firearms, you can tailor load ammunition. You can go through your cases, your primers, bullets, powder charges. You can go through every combination, and you can develop a load for those guns. And every gun being different, and basically you're trying to find that harmonic vibration through your gun, so that as your barrel's whipping, and they're all whipping as the bullet goes down the bore, that it just is whipping in exactly the same spot every time when that bullet exits, and that's how you get an extremely accurate gun, through that consistency. And rimfire, you can't tailor load your ammunition. You get what the manufacturers manufacture. And, of course, the more expensive ammunition you buy, generally, the more accurate it is, and the more consistent it is. And with the Army, we shot a great deal of Ely 10X, which is a very, very high-grade ammunition. We used to go to Ely, and I'd taken guns there, and which our international team, we would take probably 12 to 14 usually on-shoots rifles, barreled actions, and go to Ely in England and test ammunition. And
you didn't leave them there, did you?
No. They need them. But we would test ammunition there and go through, 40, 50 different lots, and we would shoot probably 4,000 to 6,000 rounds over the period of a week testing ammunition. And we'd use their facility, and we could mount the barreled actions in their fixtures, and just go from lot to lot to lot, shoot our groups, and track them, and consolidate them, and figure out which ammunitions were the best and the most consistent, which was very deceiving. Something you would see, and I'll get off on another tangent with this, but something you would see in testing ammunition is you might shoot a lot of ammunition, like lot number 1. And you might shoot 10 shots, and it's a .4 group. And you shoot another 10 shots, and it's a .4 group. And you shoot another 10 shots, and it's a 4.4 group. And you go, wow, that's really good ammunition. It's shooting pretty good, real consistent, nice round group. You shoot another lot that might shoot .5, and you shoot it again, and you get a .4, and you get another .5. And you say, well, you think, well, the one that the lot number 1 that shot the 3.4 groups is definitely the one you want. But when you consolidate them, and you can do that with electronic targeting systems, you can see that you might get those really small groups, but they're not in the same place every time. That one, the first .4 or whatever the group is, I'm just using .4 as a number, but your first .4 might be right in the center where you thought it was. The next .4 might be a tenth over to the right, and then the third one might be a tenth, down low. When you consolidate those, whereas the .5 group that you shot in lot number 2 might stay in the exact same place. So that's actually a better ammunition. It doesn't shoot as well, but it's more consistent. And the last thing a competitive shooter needs when he's competing is to start chasing his zero as he or she are shooting at their target, and they keep calling a 10, and it's a scratch 10, out the right, and they shoot another one with the scratch out there. Well, then they got to click over, to the right. They got to chase that and go, okay, I'm moving. They click their sights, and then it's going to move down. The next time they shoot, they may be shooting down a little bit. So then you're constantly chasing it, never really knowing where you're supposed to be, whereas the other lot of ammunition might actually, be more consistent. You can keep your 0. You just keep shooting your 10s and shoot your 10 and shoot your 10. Once you have your 0, and you're good there. But anyway, ammunition in a 22 is often, a very weak link. You have to do your research. You have to do your testing, and often just because it has somebody's name on it, like Elite, and it costs $18 a box, doesn't mean that it's going to shoot good.
So,
there's plenty of it that shot really well, and plenty of it that didn't shoot any better than $4 a box Wolf.
right.
Just because it's good.
So, Tony, what do you and Mary use when you're testing out the new receivers and barrels? Are you guys using Ely or Wolf or CCI? What have you found to be pretty consistent?
Yeah, we use Ely 10X.
Okay.
It's just overall, it's going to be the best.
Mm-hmm.
There's Wolf is really good. There's, again, if you test all your, do all your testing for certain guns, you might find some that might be really, really cheap. Really cheap ammo that shoots really good in a gun. Every once in a while, a really cheap ammunition might be really, really good. It's rare, but I've never seen it, but I know people who have. And, that they've come across. John Feenstra, a friend of mine that I worked with, he writes for Precision Shooting and did the Black Magic, the rifle on the AR-15,
mm-hmm.
and he wrote that book. And he had a I don't even remember if it's 1022, but it's a 22 long rifle that he had found a lot of Winchester, whatever their Generico brand is, and it was 77 cents a box for this stuff, and it just shot a dot.
Wow.
So he goes back and went all over the county to every gun store that sold that ammunition and made them look through all their ammunition for the right lot number, and if they had it, he bought everything they had.
Oh, wow.
It's just one of those kind of finds, that ammunition was super cheap, but it was super good in this particular rifle. But we work, we do our testing with 10X just because we know it's, consistent, and you don't have to do a lot of guessing as to whether it's the gun or the ammunition. We kind of, have done our research over the years on what makes a good barrel, what the chamber dimension should be, and how the chamber's cut. We have a system that flows coolant through the barrel, and it's so that it constantly, when we chamber a barrel, there's constantly cutting fluid on the cutting edge of the reamer, and it's amazing the difference in the finish we get in a chamber with that system and without it, and also how critical in a 22 long rifle, how critical the throat of the chamber is. It has to be really smooth, completely burr free. You don't want tool marks in it at all, and it makes a really, really big difference in how well the rifles shoot. And we look at a lot of barrels and get a lot of stuff through here, and it's amazing what we see when we start, gauging barrels and the taper. A barrel, we have 2 10,000ths taper from breech to muzzle. That's extremely important. We've had big name, the big, $450 barrel people, their barrels before, and where the taper's going the wrong way. And, of course, we didn't know they were going the wrong way until we kept shooting the barrels and couldn't get them to shoot. And of course, you start doing your, breaking it down, doing your measuring, engaging everything, and finding out that they're backwards and they get the wrong end. It's coming out the wrong end. So that kind of thing's real important. The finish of the barrel, the chamber, the taper to it. In our experience, you have to have either a straight barrel, I'm talking about 10,000ths of an inch. It has to be completely straight with no taper, or a maximum of a half a thousandth, which would be 5/10, which is pretty extreme. Where we use 2. And it makes a world of difference. As that bullet's going down the barrel, it's actually being choked very, very minutely. Very, very little. But if you have any expansion at the muzzle, your barrel's not going to shoot. You need it to be choking down and getting a little bit tighter the full length of the barrel.
as long as we're talking about barrels, what are the differences? As we'll just keep it to confined to the 22 caliber. What are the differences as far as lengths of barrel? What are the advantages and disadvantages there? And I guess where does it max out on length? And what does a bull barrel do for the 10-22 shooter?
Length, I don't see that length makes a whole lot of difference. The barrels we manufacture, we make them 16 and a half inches, which 16 inches is the legal limit of, shortness. So we just go 16 and a half. Pretty much everybody in the industry does that. They add that extra half inch just in case the ATF has a bad tape measure. Then we go 18, and we offer 20s. Then there's 21s, 22s, 23s, and people can argue, to no end, 24, 26 inches, whatever they think the length of the barrel needs to be. But I've never seen that in length, and that again with 10-22s or with bolt guns, whether they're even on shoots, 2013s, whatever, 20 series, 18 series, whatever they are. We had with the Army in all our testing, we had shooters that like long, skinny barrels. We might do a skinny 24-inch barrel, and we might have shooters that want a 16-inch barrel that's extremely fat, and they all shot well. You could never put and I've done a lot of testing, and I've done my testing with government money, so it didn't bother me to hacksaw and chop one off. That kind of experimentation, whereas the average gun shop has to look and say, well, this is a $400 barrel, and we spent all day barreling it up. We're not going to just chop it up. Where I could say, well, let's start chopping. And that's where our research and development would come, and we could experiment with different lengths, different thicknesses, diameters, different tapers, different chambers, different crown. We did it all, and just try to find the magic. And you kind of come to the point where there's not a magic. It's just it is consistency. But the bull barrel, the theory behind the bull barrel is just more rigid. Normally in a bolt gun, you use a bull barrel, a heavy barrel, because it's more rigid, it flexes less, more consistent, less vibration, basically. On a 10-22, it's an auto loader, and an auto loader moves. It's quite different than a bolt gun, because a bolt gun, when you pull the trigger, the only thing that moves is the striker or the firing pin, and it goes forward and it just clicks. And it might move as little as a quarter of an inch. It just pops and it fires that round, and nothing moves while the bullet goes down range. Well, in an autoloader, like a 10-22, when you do that, the hammer, comes forward, fires the round. Well, now the bolt, before the bullet leaves the muzzle, the bolt is already on a rearward position. So the gun is cycling prior to the bullet exiting. So the heavier barrel, in my opinion, on a 10-22 actually adds a lot of stability to the rifle. Basically the heavier you make the rifle, that's where the difference between a 16 and a half and maybe a 20-inch barrel comes, or a 21, whatever. Is that it's just a little heavier, and I don't think if you mount them in a machine rest and shoot them, they shoot the same. But if you're letting the gun actually move on sandbags or in your arms or in your hands, you'll see that the extra length just adds the extra 3 or 4, maybe a quarter pound to the gun, and slows its movement down, its vibration or its wiggle down, while that bullet gets out the muzzle. But taper barrels, we do a lightweight barrel, very, very accurate, and the advantage to that is obviously just the lightweight, still very accurate. You don't really give up a lot of accuracy, other than, I think, just that movement of the gun, and some of the super lightweight barrels, if you try to shoot them like a bench rest, you just let the rifle lay there on the bags and you shoot it with nothing but your trigger finger, you'll get, in my opinion, when I do it, I get bad results. I get much better results if I lay down on the gun and I actually get aggressive with the rifle and hold the rifle, the forearm, I hold it down. I use the sandbags and everything just like you want to, but I'm actually holding the rifle secure and fairly rigidly as I shoot it, and the groups get quite a bit better when I do that than if I just kind of try not to interfere with the gun. It's better to interfere with it.
We've talked a lot about some gunsmithing topics. For somebody that wants to get into gunsmithing as a hobby, where would be the best place for them to begin?
Gosh, as a hobby, you could just start tinkering. Guns like the 1022, is a great gun. It's it's modular. It's fairly easy to work on, and you can switch barrels and stocks and bolts, and you can interchange parts and do a lot of experimenting and kind of learning stuff there. AR-15, same thing. Modular gun. There's no end to the stuff you can bolt on it. It's that's a very, very basic. I don't even know if you could actually call that gunsmithing skill at all. You're just changing parts and stuff, but you could definitely learn. It's all relative, and you could definitely learn a lot from that. As far as going beyond that, it's tough, and there's not a lot of information out there to learn. Books, there's several books. I can't name any right offhand. I've read lots of them in the early years, and the more you actually do it professionally, the more you realize that the guy who wrote the book really didn't know what he was doing. He just wrote a book, and when you were ignorant, you thought you learned some things, but then as you get 10 years down the road, you read it and you're like, oh, this guy never actually did this. There's 400 questions that would come up, and he says, well, you do this like this. Well, I come up with 400 questions. Well, what if that doesn't work? And this and this and this and this and this and this, it just gets so detailed, the finer points of it all. And Maripat and I've talked about this a lot, about, writing a book or doing a video series and trying to put something like that together to have the detailed questions and to kind of address all the obstacles that you would come across in doing these projects and a project you're working on, instead of having to, like I did, I had to pretty much learn everything on my own. And I was fortunate too in some of the jobs I had that I had a knack for it, but I also was given opportunity to learn these things. But I would say just jump in and don't be afraid to try something. There's plenty of books out there, and they have a lot of good information in them. You just will eventually you'll run into things when you're reading the book and you're trying something, and things will happen, and there won't be anything in the book to address that. And then you'll be kind of stuck, but you can figure it out. Move on from there.
I would be getting a separate checking account that your wife doesn't have access to for this.
Right. Yeah.
Is this word spoken from experience?
Yeah, it's true. Maripat's always telling me about, some guy is like, you got to ship it at this date because my wife's going to be out of town, or kind of label, and can you write that it's a car part, like from Napa Auto Parts on there instead of Kid Innovative Design because I say it's for the truck, or there's always something like that. You'd be surprised how many people ask us to do that.
That's quite comical. So going beyond a hobbyist, where does someone begin if they want to become a professional gunsmith?
The best thing you can do as a gunsmith, to be a gunsmith, honestly, in my opinion, a strong machinist background is good, and and that's a lot easier to come by. A state school or a community place that has some machinist training courses. That's really, really important, because I've met a lot of gunsmiths and worked with a lot of them that were really good at what they did, but they were, a lot of them were very weak in the machining aspect. And, in the beginning, it's not a big deal, as you're just, but you'll learn so much about metallurgy and just how to, and that's what gunsmithing is. You're modifying steel and wood and everything else. And and the more you know about that, the more you can do, and the more rewarding it is. You can look at some and say, well, instead of buying this compensator and, putting it on here, I can actually make that compensator, and I can make 50 different styles. You can do it yourself and experiment, and as you're doing it, you're learning a great deal about what works, what doesn't work, what effects they have. And that, to me, that's where the fun comes. That's the fun part of job that I have and the profession I have, is being able to do that kind of thing. But that's a really good start. And as far as the gunsmith part of it goes, if you have some machining knowledge, you could probably maybe get work with a gunsmith. If you have a gunsmith in town or something, and you can help him out, and I know most of them are going to be kind of cantankerous probably, and not maybe very cooperative. I don't know. Depends on the guy, but as far as getting that experience, there's gunsmith schools. I went to the one called Colorado School of Trade, which is just strictly a gunsmith school in Lakewood back in the 80s, and then there's Trinidad, and there's also one in Pennsylvania and Oklahoma. There's several now. When I was going to school, there's two. There was Colorado School of Trades, and there's Trinidad. And kind of a rivalry thing going there, but I don't know why. But there are some schools around, and and they have. The great thing is I know Trinidad has summer courses, which is really cool. They have they have professional gunsmith. Not their instructors. Some of their instructors teach you classes, but they'll have some guy that's known for 1911s or some guy who's known for shotguns. And whatever, or AR-15s or whatever, and they'll have a week or a 2-week class that they teach, and they'll teach you, the how to work on them or modify them or build a match gun or whatever, whatever the course is, and the stock making and finishing, that kind of stuff. And I think I can see sometimes they have an engraving course, for kind of get your some knowledge on engraving a firearm. And so that's a really good way to start, and kind of cut right to the chase instead of going through all the stuff like I did, going to the gunsmith school for that course was a year, and after a year, I didn't know anything. You don't know enough. You do it all, and you go through all the steps, and you make stocks, and you barrel rifles, and and you come out. And you can not hurt yourself, but you're really not very good at it. You've had a little of this, a little of that, but you've gone through stuff like, maybe you don't even have any interest in bolt action rifles, or you don't have any interest in shotguns. So you can go to these these summer classes and take a specialized course, so that you don't have to quit your job. You can just take a week vacation and go check that out. And I've never done one, but I've always wanted to, just for the heck of it. That'd be great. And I know people who do them, and they get a lot out of them.
Do those programs, is there even a gunsmithing license? How does that, or is it just a certification? How does that work?
You don't need a license or anything to be a gunsmith. The sale of firearms, you need an FFL, firearms license, and to sell and transfer firearms. Now, I think as a gunsmith, you don't. I should know this, but we've always been a dealer, so it never was really an issue. But I think as a gunsmith, I don't think you have to have a firearms license to work on guns, and to have someone leave a gun with you, as long as it's going back to that person. It's only when they're transferring, changing hands, and somebody, and you sell it to somebody else. Well, then that's you're supposed to document that and have a firearms license. But there's no gunsmithing license or anything like that you need as far as working on guns. At least not in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
California, it might be a whole different.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
England, I know it's. You can't do anything, but here it's not really any regulation, I don't think.
Mm-hmm. Well, awesome. So going forward with your company, you have some really amazing 1022 parts. What are we going to see? I know you and I talked a little bit about this before, but what are we going to see in the future out of Kit Innovations?
There's no telling what you're going to see.
That's what we love to hear.
Yeah, you know, I love, you know, the whole research and development stuff. I love that. And, the last 4.5 years I worked for the Army, that's what I did. You know, it was just research and development and work with all the different guns, the different teams, and figure out, you know, what can we do to make this better. And, it's, you know, we have a lot of things. We have an AR-15 trigger design that's, I think, is really going to be great. There's so many of them out there, but they're all fairly limited. And I think we're onto something with ours. We have another receiver design for the 1022, and different sighting system for them. We have a lot of things that I've had time to do some CAD work, you know, and draw them up and make sure everything works in the computer and all. And we've done a little bit of prototyping on some of that stuff. But our biggest drawback is growth. You know, we've been growing so fast and so rapidly, which is really good. But it's you know, every time I see light at the end of the tunnel, we're okay. You know, we're getting caught up on this. Everything's going good. It's smooth. You know, we pick up another 25% in sales or something, and we're just, you know, it's that much busier.
That's fantastic, though. Yeah, I know we're thrilled to hear that you guys are growing, because we want to keep seeing those quality products coming out.
Yeah, but I think we still want to see a 5.7 1022 come out one day.
Oh yeah, I'd love to see a 5.7 10 or a 10.57 or whatever you end up calling it.
Wouldn't that? Yeah, that would be pretty cool.
I would, Tony. I'd be on the waiting list for that gun immediately.
I think I would
need like a 100-round capacity, or
I'm thinking even the standard 10 round. I would be thrilled if you decide you're going to make one. Put me as number 1 on the list.
I'll take number 2.
Okay, we'll do that.
Well, Tony and Maripat, we really appreciate you coming on the show today and sharing with us your knowledge of 1022s and gunsmithing, and really, really wonderful to have you guys on the show today.
Yeah, we're really glad to have been part of it. It's a real pleasure.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That wraps up episode 31. Help support In the Rabbit Hole Urban Survival podcast and blog. We're now accepting applications for show sponsors. For more information, please use the contact form on the site and choose option Advertise. If you like the podcast, make sure to leave us a review in iTunes. It helps others find us. If you didn't, well, why not tell us about it using the contact form on the site? Seriously, the show is for you, the listener. Be sure to connect with us through Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and the Urban Survival Forum through the links on the top right-hand side of the site at www.intherabbithole.com, and on the forum, forum.intherabbithole.com. Also, don't forget to sign up for the newsletter. By connecting with us, you receive updates about the site and notifications of new articles and podcast episodes. That's right, we're not just a podcast. Every week, articles are posted to the site, intherabbithole.com, that cover all manner of topics relating to surviving in an urban environment, whether in good times or in extreme circumstances. Show notes are posted with each episode, where we invite you to comment on the show and interact with us. From Houston, Texas. Till next time, stay safe and sound.